Welcome back to Two Sides of the Table, Pete. We're back in the studio again.
It's fantastic to be back again. Look, we got so much great feedback on the last episode as well as episode 1. Yeah, really looking forward to building on the momentum that we've created so far.
Yeah, awesome. I think it's been a really well received by the industry so far. So very grateful for that. And we're going to talk today about building a winning sales process. So this is on the lips of almost everyone I'm talking to at the moment, and I'm sure you're the same, is how do I get more sales? So let's talk about the process. But before we do, what has been piquing your interest this week?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. Look, for those that don't know, is not only do I run Digital Team, I also do some board and advisory work. And, it's that time of the year where everyone's starting to think about strategy and building budgets for FY26. I know it feels scary we're doing that for FY26 when we're still well and deep in FY25. And look, one of the things I've always found is Harvard Business Review is great for providing some really insightful articles. And look, one of the videos that I recently watched was around strategy, and we'll put a link down below for that. But it was really about creating value as part of that strategy piece, and very much about what is the willingness of customers to pay versus how much you pay for the resource being the opportunity for you to create value. So the analogy is that, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm willing to pay $9 for a cup of coffee when I'm at the airport there. However, at 10 o'clock, I'm not prepared to pay that amount. So, that willingness to pay and how much you can then charge based on the scenario versus if you delight your team members and delight them, it means that you don't necessarily have to be competing on price because you've got a great culture. So that gap in the middle is how you then start to create value. And I think, that was something I was just watching this morning, and I thought it'd be really good to share with the listeners about how to unlock value through strategy, because strategy is often seen as a dark art.
Yeah, and I think probably relevant to the conversation we're going to have today.
Yeah, because sales is part of understanding that problem, but also understanding how you position from a pricing perspective as well. So, I look forward to where we're going to go with that. And what about yourself? Well, what's piqued your interest over the last week?
My weekly recommendation this week is actually a book called It Starts With You. It's by an author called Gillian Turecki, I think her name is. And basically what it does is it talks about situations you find yourself in through life or relationships you have with various people, whether that's business relationships or personal relationships. Everything comes back to you and how you react to those types of situations and the relationship that you have with yourself, because the relationship that you have with yourself is the most important relationship. So that's been really eye-opening for me. One of the things in the book is that you can't blame other people for the things that go wrong in your life. So, it was a really almost confronting book to read from my perspective, but good from, I guess, a perspective, giving me a different perspective on the world. So,
I
really good.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that too is that often situations are really based on the energy that you bring to the situation. Yeah. So it's when you're positive about something, often people are then positive directly back from you. So, creating that great energy, whether it's just simply saying thank you or just being really engaged, it means the other person, no matter how their day is, all of a sudden radiates off that. So, I'll definitely have to add that to the Kindle and have a read on the way to Sydney later today.
Yeah, perfect. I have to say I'm an old school girl, so I've got the actual hard copy paper book, but definitely add it to the Kindle. It's probably a lot easier to obtain that way.
Yeah, fantastic.
All right, so we're going to jump in today around creating a winning sales process. And as I sort of said at the beginning, this is on the lips of nearly everyone I speak to, and we'll go into marketing in a later episode, but then how marketing sort of feeds into that winning sales process. Now, we spoke in our first episode, Pete, about your love of sales and the things that, you used to do at MOQ Digital and all of that. So let's start with the pitfalls. What are people getting wrong? Like, why is this becoming so hard for MSPs and IT business owners to achieve?
Yeah, and look, I think we briefly scratched the surface on some of this in the previous conversations around really sales is having a conversation and identifying a problem. because really it's understanding the particular needs of the organisation and the particular needs of the customer and being able to lean directly into that, because there's no point trying to jam a square peg into a round hole when really it's about understanding. But I think really sales, what people actually often overcomplicate is sales is very much a numbers game. So if you're wanting a particular number of deals, it's understanding, well, how many leads, how many opportunities are then needed in order to be able to then achieve that. And I think one of the things that I often see is that people don't understand what those sales metrics are around what's the lead to conversion ratio, what's the pipeline coverage that you've got, how many days does it take on average to close a deal. And I think the opportunity is really just starting to then just look at, well, what are my numbers today? Because once you've got the numbers, you can then start to think about, well, if I change something, do I get a magnitude of improvement, or does it make it less improvement? So making it worse. So, okay, well, let's not do that again. So I think one of the key takeaways is just thinking about what those numbers are today, because once you have a baseline, you can then improve directly from that. But I know you're talking to customers about sales all of the time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's sometimes people don't actually understand the numbers, and I don't want to muddy the waters with marketing speak, but because we'll go into marketing in our next episode. But really, I think one of the pitfalls is there isn't a pre-established audience there already. So there really has to be work done around building up that audience before we can start to sell to them. And I think the other thing is in your, when we were talking at the beginning, you were saying, it's about adding value. I think what we see, apart from other things around consistency and stuff we've talked about before, is people are not actually, they're not educating the customer and providing that value before they try and ask for the sale. It's just straight to the sale, and people are like, I don't know who you are. So warming that audience up and building that audience, I think, is really key to being able to sell in the first place, let alone getting that sales process sorted.
Look, it's interesting. Look, one of the things I like to consume is lots of different content, and I recently reread Jordan Belfort, famous for The Wolf of Wall Street. So has actually just released a new book on sales. So whatever you consider about Jordan Belfort and maybe some of the, let's call it, shonky things that he may have done in the past, one of the things he came up with was a really robust sales process called the straight line. And really understanding about, well, in order for you to be successful in selling, someone needs to have trust in the company, someone needs to have trust in the product, and someone needs to have trust in you as an individual. So one of the key things from a sales perspective is, how do you build that trust with somebody in order for them to be able to then really often trust you, especially in IT, with almost your inner secrets, because effectively IT has access to everything. So being able to build that trust relationship, whether you're selling penny stocks or whether you're selling high-end IT services, it really is about that straight line process about how do you keep someone in that sales lane that they then trust you. But one of the things I often hear when I talk to founders is they typically don't have good things to say about salespeople. They've often gone through 3 or 4 salespeople. For whatever reason, the salespeople haven't been able to be as good as the founder, and there seems to be this common theme that goes through that. And look, I think founder sales is always going to be, you know it better than anyone, but you're also more energized about it because that sale is going to be what puts money in your jeans.
Yeah.
But the challenge often that I see is that as founders bring salespeople in, there's no playbook. It's all sitting in the founder's head. They know what to say. They know the objections. They know how to present the value of their proposition, and they expect that the salesperson's automatically going to know all of this. So,
so true.
And think about, what is that sales playbook? So how do you then go through a repeatable process in order to be able to get a consistent outcome with that? And I noticed you nodding your head there when I spoke about that churn of salespeople. And I'm sure you've seen some recent examples of that in conversations that you've been having.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And the same thing can also be said for marketing. We do work with customers sometimes that have had a couple of marketing agencies, and it's I think in those situations I usually find myself asking why has that churn occurred. And I think one of the reasons is what you suggested about there's no playbook or no how-to guide. But I actually think another reason is around the founder also not wanting to let go to some degree. And I think it's, and this maybe comes back to the whole founder mentality. It's almost like you're letting go of that potential customer, and you're not sure what's going to happen, and you're nervous, and maybe you're not fully trusting yet. So I think there is an element of that in that mindset of a founder of having to actually let go. And I think there's always going to be things as a founder that you're never going to let go of. Like those high value customers, you're always going to want to be involved in those conversations. So maybe starting with your that lower sort of tier of customer and handing that over helps you build that trust with that sales team.
I think what you're describing there is what I call the white knight syndrome. You see it with many founders is they like to come on the back of the steed, on the white knight, come in and save the day. And whether that's with a project that's gone wrong or whether that's closing the deal, they almost like to be that key person with that.
But let's talk about the pitfall of that though, right? Because if as a founder, if you're doing the selling all the time, there's nowhere else to escalate up, right? So if you have a customer who's disgruntled or, doesn't like the pricing or anything like that, they can't go any higher than you. You own the business. So it almost leaves you a little bit optionless. So having someone taking care of some of your sales or even, like I said, your lower level customers, it allows that escalation process to occur.
Good cop, bad cop.
That's right.
Yeah. But the other part is what happens when you go on holidays? All of a sudden sales just stops and you come back to a very, very empty pipeline. And it's thinking about how do you have an always on strategy from a sales perspective there. And I think one of the things that we're touching on is really about that repeatability. Because if you know that your salespeople are going to answer in a particular way with your voice, they're going to look after the customers just as much as you do, you can actually build that trust really quickly because they're following a repeatable process. And the analogy I use is my two amazing daughters who are 5 and 7. Now, when we go bowling, we always put the bumpers up because when we put the bumpers up, it guarantees that no matter where they throw the ball in that lane, they're going to get the outcome that they expect is to hit the pins. We take the bumpers away and who knows where that ball's going to go? More than likely probably in the gutter. And that's often what happens is when you don't have a sales process, you've got no consistency. You don't know where the conversation's going to go. You don't know how that person's going to close the deal. And they might say something to actually really annoy a customer and actually they're all of a sudden, don't mention the war and they mention the war and all of a sudden, guess what? You've no longer got a customer. So creating that, framework where the salesperson can work in, but then have that freedom, but knowing that here's one boundary, here's the other boundary to then get that consistent outcome. Because let's face it, in sales, we always want to knock down all 10 pins.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So let's talk about that repeatable process because you have a sales team, small sales team with digital team.
Yep.
You've had large sales teams in the past. What would you say is the biggest piece of advice when doing that playbook? Because it sounds like the playbook has been in play both times and the guardrails have been up. So how did you start with that? Like, did you have to get information out of your head? Like, how does someone start with that? Because I know from my experience, almost all of my customers are founder-led, owner-led sales. So how do they expand that?
And one of the key things is actually almost hanging yourself upside down and shaking that information that's in your head out. None of us really like to document it. Let's face it, in IT, it's one of those things that whether it's getting information into IT glue from your service desk team or whether it's building sales playbook, it's not part of our DNA. And so really it's about taking those things, the stories that you tell. So, when you're talking to a customer, you almost tell those stories about a customer success win or how you've dealt with that problem or the history of the business. So, taking those things that you do as a founder and getting them down on paper so that other people can then rinse and repeat. So it sounds really basic about, what's the history of the business? What's your key customer wins? What's your go-to-market strategy? All of those things. But the reality is IT changes so quickly as well. So it's not a set and forget. So you might bring a new product into market. So maybe you bring Huntress in because you're then starting to then add security into your capability, or you bring Threat Locker into the stage. How are you then going to educate that salesperson about what it is that the story is that goes along with that? And I think one of the things is consistency around storytelling, so that everyone's telling the same story, everyone's actually presenting in the same way. But as part of that, thinking about as a founder, after you've had the conversation, what it is that you do next.
Yeah.
Do you send somebody a case study? Do you send them a link to a YouTube video? You know, there's things that you do almost actually because you've done it for so long that you don't even think about it, but you've almost created your own sales process and it's documenting that. But what that also, yeah, and then thinking about how does that tie back to the way that you sell? What are the deal stages? So having a look inside of your CRM system, whether that's Dynamics, maybe you're using ConnectWise Sell, maybe you're then using HubSpot. You know, what are the deal stages that you go in, and thinking about, well, how do I move someone from one stage to the next? Let's face it, nobody typically consummates the marriage on the first date. And the same thing with sales. You need to then go through a number of stages in order to be able to get the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also is a documenting things on as well, is documenting those sales and that pipeline, because you tend to run into so many people on a day-to-day basis that could be potential customers, making sure that you're documenting those leads, and, you know, they're not even leads at that point, they're prospects. So, you know, documenting those and making sure they're in your CRM as well. I mean, I be the first to put my hand up and say I do not document all of my pipeline. I should, because I preach it to my customers. But again, the plumber analogy, it is a little bit of work to go in and do that type of stuff. So I guess how is it about baking that into your routine, Pete? Like, do you make sure, like, is that what you do in your 5 a.m. when you wake up? Like, it's you go in there and you're really just about making sure everything's up to date?
So for me, it's in real time. So as an opportunity comes in, or as I have a conversation, being able to capture that information.
Yeah.
Look, as a founder myself, look, I'm often juggling many, many plates. As much as I wish it was all just beer and Skittles, there's a reality of having to spin lots of plates. And so, you know, I'm only as good as what I've put inside. So we use HubSpot for our CRM. So I'm only as good as what I've put into HubSpot there, because I'll wake up the next morning at 5 a.m. and forget what I've done yesterday, let alone 5 minutes ago. So, you know, capturing that information is key. And I think, you know, salespeople are often pretty poor at adding data into CRM. And look, one of the tips and tricks that I've learned over time is, you know, salespeople typically get, you know, remunerated on a base salary, and then there's a commission or an on-target earnings component of that. Having a small component in regards to then CRM hygiene. So making sure that the deals are inside of CRM and they automatically just don't magically close, that there has been that deal in there. And look, I remember being with a founder colleague of mine many years ago, and I think, you know, I've never been brutal enough to do it, but his view was if it's in CRM, if it's not in CRM and it closes, you don't get the commission. So yeah, definitely keeping that up to date and accurate.
I think that raises a great point actually around building that sales culture in the business, because I think during the Warty days, that sales culture was quite strong in the business. And that doesn't mean that everyone was doing selling, because there was definitely a defined sales team, but there was that culture of everyone understood the importance that a sale meant for the business. And so is that part of the playbook, or is that its own sort of culture building exercise? Because that CRM component and making sure the data's up to date in CRM is part of that culture as well. Like, I don't think any of the sales team in the Warty days would have not updated their CRM, because it was all part of the culture.
Look, it is definitely a DNA that needs to be built into the business. And, you know, I think as technical people, there's often this delivery versus sales. who's more important in the business? Is delivery more important or is sales more important? And no one is more important in the organisation. Everyone's got an equal play, but really it's about one team. But let's face it, we're all selling every single day of the week, whether
Yes.
that's in our personal lives or whether that's in our business lives. So, I might want to go to Fiji. So I've got to sell the idea. I've got to plant the seed. There's a process that I need to go through in order to go, well, we're going to go to Fiji rather than Phuket. So there's a sale that goes along with that. But I think one of the things is empowering engineers to capture opportunity. They're at the coalface. They're the ones that are talking to the customers day to day. They're around the water cooler hearing that chat. Oh, we're thinking about doing a data center move, or Windows 10 end of life's coming up. We're not quite sure what to do about that. Nobody expects those engineers to actually, write the proposal, pitch it, put the deck together. It's simply just capturing that and letting somebody know, hey, I heard the customer talk about this. Maybe let's go and pop that in CRM and see if there's an opportunity that exists there.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's it. It's those nose to the ground, ears to the ground sort of opportunities that I think the delivery teams in various organisations can add to. And I think one of the things that you said to me is that everyone in the business is a salesperson, and maybe they're selling because they're doing a really good job, but it doesn't mean they're actually out selling, but everyone should be a salesperson in the business.
100%, because I often use the analogy as even the person in accounts is a salesperson, because you could have done a great job of selling the solution, you could have done a great job of delivering the solution, but if you get the invoicing wrong, you're going to dissatisfy the customer at that particular point in time. And often, being able to have ongoing work is being able to have, seamless interaction at every stage there. So bringing everyone into the fore and, really planning that, everyone is a salesperson. You may not necessarily carry that in your email signature as salesperson, but everyone contributes to the success of the business.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about discovery calls. So discovery calls, I think, are the fundamental part of an IT organization, because without understanding probably any organization, but I don't think IT sales is as transactional as, say, a B2C market. So understanding the customer's needs, and I think this is where you come in and you talk about the understanding what the problem is, and tailoring your solutions to fix that problem. Discovery calls don't always have to be a set up discovery call, do they?
I think the discovery call is really about understanding, is there a fit between what the customer needs and what you deliver? And let's face it, no is always an appropriate answer, because it's easy to go down rabbit holes and spend lots of energy on something that's not a right fit, or something that you're never ever going to be able to win from a sales perspective there. So using that discovery call is really about, is it the right technology fit? Does the customer have budget? Are they in the right buying cycle? And do you actually even have sufficient capacity to deliver a great outcome? So all of these things then really help to then go, well, we've identified an opportunity. How do we then double down and focus energy on it? So it's really then saying, well, I'm happy not to focus all of my energy because that customer may not be the right fit for me. But I think one of the things is always about how you build equity with a potential customer. Even if they're not the right fit for you, how do you introduce them to a colleague? How do you introduce them to another safe pair of hands that then delivers a great outcome? Because it may be that the customer's too small for you. You might be focused on, 50 seats and above. This customer might only be 10 seats. But guess what? That customer's going to grow, and hopefully once they get to that critical mass, they come back to you because you really looked after them. So although you might not be able to transact on that particular opportunity, how do you then plant the seed and look after somebody? Because, I always think that once you pay something forward, you'll then get paid back in spades down the track. So, those discovery calls are an opportunity to build equity as well, even if those customers are not a right fit. And Kayla, what have you seen in regards to, your experience with discovery calls and really finding that right customer fit?
Yeah, I was actually going to add something to what you said, but it sort of relates in a way, and that is actually understanding if there's a values alignment between yourself and the customer. And I've been on the other side of this fence as well, and been had customers that weren't the right value fit back in the early days. And I think, this may sound a little bit airy-fairy, but I think one of the things that you've said to me as well is actually do trust your gut and go with it. I think I knew quite early on that customer wasn't a fit, but I was trying so hard to fit our services into what this customer required that it ended up just sort of it was a mutual parting of ways, and I'm happy to talk about that. But it was a mutual parting of ways, and I was happy that happened in the end, because it was it was for the best for us. So I think just building on what you said, it's making sure that there is a values alignment and you're both trying to get to the same outcome, and you actually like working with the person. Because if you're a high touch business, which Inception is high touch with our customers, you're dealing with that person quite constantly and that business owner quite constantly. So making sure that you actually almost like them as a person and their values are aligned to you and they're reasonable, because reasonable people have reasonable conversations. So I think getting that out in the discovery call and getting that almost that gut check, I think is really important as well. So, but I think, basically what you said before around, let's make sure that you're not trying to retrofit your service. Not retrofit, that's the wrong word, but make sure that you're not trying to manipulate your services to fit what they actually need, because sometimes it's, like you said, it's okay to say no if you can't service that customer.
Look, if you're a steak restaurant, you're never going to keep a vegan happy. So there's no point trying. And I think the other thin is, there's nothing wrong with sacking a customer as well. So, often, just like being in a personal relationship, everyone comes in with the best of intentions.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden, something happens. You then, drift apart as a result of that. All of a sudden, it's actually almost a toxic relationship that it becomes in.
Yeah.
And, often people stay in personal relationships that are toxic for longer than they should. And the same with business relationships as well, as because you're spending a lot of energy, and often it doesn't matter how much energy you put into that relationship, you're never going to make it successful. So, don't be afraid to then, because customers change, they either grow, there's a change in leadership, they get acquired, reevaluating if that customer, that classic, is it an A customer, is it a B customer? And if it's a C customer, well, why is they on your books?
Yeah, that's it. We always talk about A and B customers and C customers, right? What is the biggest gap that you think that the MSP market or the TSP market is missing when it comes to the sales process? Do you think it's that playbook? Because I can talk about it from the marketing perspective, but that's not what we're talking about today.
Look, I think, having working with a couple of companies at the moment going through budget season, look, it's pretty easy to put a number on a spreadsheet. I want to grow by 20%. I want to add another $1 million of revenue. Whatever that metric might be, the important thing is, how are you going to be deliberate and what are you going to do in order to be able to achieve that? Thinking about, sales, sometimes you get the bluebird.
Yeah.
The customer picks up the phone and all of a sudden they say, I wasn't happy with my last provider. I want to move another 50 seats across. Someone told me that you were awesome. But let's face it, sales is not quite as easy as catching those bluebirds. There's often a lot of grind that goes on with that, whether that's being at trade shows, whether that's then doing outbound telemarketing, whatever that might be. What is the thing that you're going to do in order to be able to achieve that sales outcome? So I think often sales is a little bit of a hope. We hope that this is going to happen. I think the opportunity is what are the deliberate actions that you're going to do in order to be able to then drive that sales outcome that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest gap is around, I think that a lot of business owners assume that they've got that audience already established, and maybe this is getting too far into the marketing, but the two do go hand in hand. So making sure that you've actually got that established audience, I think is really key. And what does that actually mean? Like, what does an established audience mean? And are they actually, if you've got 1,000 people liking your LinkedIn page, are those actually people that are customers and are ready to buy? Because I can guarantee you probably only 2% of them are. So how so making sure that, what are the activities that you're going to do to build that audience so that when those bluebirds do come along, you can spot them easier and you can catch them easier.
Yeah, but I think one of the things to maybe talk about, and maybe it's the little bit of the elephant in the room when it starts to become to managed service providers, is it is such a long sales cycle.
Yeah,
Often it's
true.
over 2 years. So, often it's a 3-year contract that the customer is in. In order for them to be able to move, you might have a conversation with them many, many times to build that trust over that 2-year period. And it's about that consistency and continuing to be able to then turn up. And it's often hard to measure that, especially in year one, where it just seems like such a long way away before that customer is ready to move. And I think that's one of the challenges is that many MSPs are facing is they need to almost acquire other businesses in order to be able to then accelerate that sales cycle. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing so many M&A transactions taking place is to accelerate that growth there. And it's interesting seeing what's happening in the market around, some of those contract terms. There's a number of organisations that are now starting to go, well, we don't lock you in regards to that. So I think there's starting to be definitely some change in that space, but I think it's this long sales cycle and thinking about, well, if I'm going to have a conversation now, I may not necessarily close this for 2 years, and how you then build out that nurturing process to then keep in contact and keep engaged along that period.
Yeah, we closed a customer last year that I started talking to probably when I first started the business, so 18 months before that. And like, you're right, it felt like I was just having these conversations and it wasn't going to lead to anything until it finally did. So I think the lesson there for me and potentially for other business owners is you're not wasting your breath by having those conversations. You need to actually keep building equity with the customer to be able to close them finally. And it will be even more sweet when you do close them.
But I think it's back to also the conversation at the start about having the data. Like, what is the average time to sale? So is this deal actually inside of those metrics, or has it pushed outside of that? And understanding why. So why has it taken longer to close this particular opportunity? Because maybe you are wasting your breath at that particular point in time when
That's
the deal is then gone past what your average deal cycle is.
Yeah, and what are the reasons for that, like identifying what that is. Okay, we're going to start to dabble in the marketing now. So how can MSPs or TSPs align sales and marketing? What do you think the secret sauce is? Because you've done it really well in the past.
I think in many organisations that marketing sits in this air gap silo.
Talked about that last time.
Sales believe that they're the most important person in the room, and that marketing doesn't do anything. It's this fluffy thing off to the side that just does branding and maybe puts a couple of logos on the local footy team or something along those lines. But the reality is it's about attribution. So being actually able to understand where that lead has come from. So every organisation has a different funnel that's effective for them. It might be that it's your local, chamber of commerce. It might be it's an industry group. And it might actually be sponsoring the football team, but understanding, where did that lead come from? And I think when sales and marketing are working really well, it's the attribution and being able to see that. And you'll often hear the 3-letter acronym throwing out around MQL, or marketing qualified lead. So being able to bring that qualified lead that's been able to then, you've validated that they've got a problem, they've shown intent because they've downloaded an artifact, they've engaged in an event that you've done, and all of a sudden that lead comes to sales. And let's face it, I've never seen a salesperson in all of my time on this earth that said I've got enough leads. They always want more leads.
Yeah.
And that's where marketing works hand in hand with sales to be able to bring that high quality of lead, but also creating that feedback loop, because not all leads are equally weighted. So taking the feedback about what does a good lead look like and how to go and find more of those. So I think there's definitely a synergistic relationship. And I know you've done a lot of work with customers around how to integrate those two effectively. Is there any tips that you've seen for the audience?
Yeah, I think what you've said is a really good point. And there's actually a really good diagram. It's sort of like a triangle flipped on its side. And, you've got sales sort of at the top, and the triangle's sort of in half. And I'll put this diagram together and put it in the show notes. But it's think of a triangle flipped on its side, a line through the middle of the triangle, and you've got marketing and sales on either side of the line. And if you think about it, marketing and sales are running together, right, to the pointy end of the triangle. So making sure that they're constantly aligned, constantly working together, I think is really key. You shouldn't have, I think, I'm very passionate about this, you shouldn't have a marketing team sitting siloed and a sales team sitting siloed. They need to be communicating and talking with each other on a regular basis. Marketing needs to be creating updates and doing updates around what they've done, and sales needs to be receiving that. And I think that's sometimes in my experience, in my corporate sort of experience, that's where I've seen the disconnect, is that, you know, sales sort of, you do the marketing report and you show the results, and sales sort of looks at it and pats you on the head and go, great job, you know, we've got it from here, like go back into your box. And I think that's not the case. I worked on a 5-year deal a couple of years ago now around getting some tech onto a major public transport organisation. And that deal was a 5-year sales cycle, which it just seems astronomical. But what that 5 years consisted of was sales going out to the customer, listening to the customer, understanding what they wanted to see, coming back, bringing that back to the marketing team, and marketing then creating content that their sales team could take out to the next meeting. So they were meeting with the customer every 3 to 6 months, right? So it was I've never seen marketing and sales work together like that before, but it was a massive eye-opening experience for me, because I've never seen that feedback loop happen in action. And that was a $24 million deal, right? So it was worth the 5 years of investment and, you know, the content creation and all of that. So I think you really see a downfall when marketing and sales are not talking to each other. I think, to your point as well, around the attribution is really where CRM becomes the master here. Making sure that your CRM is up to date and you're capturing everything. You know, we work with a lot of customers who have things in different systems, something in Dynamics, something in ConnectWise, something in HubSpot. Getting those into one system and making it consistent, I think, is really, really important. And a lot of customers, you know, don't want to move away from certain systems, and that's okay. But how do we make them talk to each other is I think, one of the biggest gaps in the marketing sales process and alignment. It's really hard for us to show what a good job marketing is doing if we can't link up the activity with the opportunity. So that would probably be my, I guess, building upon what you're saying, but my points as well are around, you know, this stuff is really important if you want to see how effective your marketing is and your sales are, because obviously your sales, you know, you can see the numbers, but I think sometimes marketing gets put in a bit of a silo, and, you know, like you say, they get labelled as the branders or the, you know, they just look after the sponsorships or something like that, when really there is an attribution to the sales.
100%. And I think that single pane of glass becomes so important, because if you think back to your deal cycles, where sales and marketing work so effectively is, you know, marketing can help move a deal from one stage to the next. You know, maybe a deal's stuck. The customer's in a decision-making phase and they haven't been able to make a decision. Marketing might be able to produce a key artifact, whether that's a topical LinkedIn post that all of a sudden triggers something in the customer's mind, or a case study that then helps provide validation in regards to that scenario. So really thinking about, often you're doing that sales meeting. Typically, most people do it on a Monday morning. I like Tuesday mornings because, you know, let's face it, Mondays are a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
But often marketing's not part of that meeting, and that's where they can then add value to the table to go, well, these are some things that we could do in order to move that customer to the right. Because let's face it, we always want to take a customer from an opportunity to then a PO. So, you know, they can definitely help directly with that. So, you know, creating that, you know, synergistic relationship, and always thinking about, well, what else can we do to move the deal forward? Like, is it taking the customer out to lunch? Is it then introducing them to another customer? Like, what can you do in order to be able to then come back to the Jordan Belfort straight line of how do you build trust? Because once you've got trust, it's easier to be able to then sell a solution.
Yeah, I love that line in that movie where I think it's at the beginning and at the end, where he's like, "Some with a pen." I think it's a great. Great line.
It's been a little while since I have seen the movie, but I heard that there's actually a Wolf of Wall Street 2 coming, so
Oh,
maybe we might get to see them sell the pen again.
a bit more Leonardo.
Yeah, don't know. But yeah, look, I think sales is one of those things that it's actually not a dark art. Sales is a numbers game, and really, I think the key takeaway I think for everyone that's listening is, what are your numbers? And just going away and doing that analysis and having a good, strong CRM system and a way to track deals will enable you to do that automatically.
I think as well, like if you need some help doing those numbers, then get in touch with us. We do these numbers all the time for our customers and actually design their funnels for them. So, more than happy to, and that's part of our proposal process. So, more than happy to do that.
And so what's the one key number you think that organisations should be looking at? Is it CAC, or what do you think is the number that, if they don't look at one number apart from this, what do you think it is?
For me, I think it's the number of opportunities or the value of the opportunities that they need to hit their revenue goal for the year. Because if we've got that number, we can work back from everything else. I think the other thing is, what's the percentage of their closing? So they're usually the two numbers that I need to ask is, what's your average deal size, and what percentage of opportunities would you close?
Your win-loss ratio.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
being able to then extrapolate that out to then, okay, I've got my win-loss ratio. I then know what I'm trying to close. How much pipeline coverage do I need?
Yep,
So in order to close one deal, if I'm closing at only 33%, that means I need 3 deals in pipeline for every one deal I want to close.
Yeah, exactly. It means we can work back up the funnel to understand how much marketing effort is required as part to get to the bottom of the funnel, essentially.
And so what about brute force sales? Because I think many organisations, especially MSPs, especially that are founder-led, it is very much brute force sales and very little marketing.
Do you know, when we first started working together, Pete, it's really funny you bring this up. You said to me, I think I said to you, how are you growing so quickly? And you were like, I'm on the phone every day. And this is the thing I think you preach to all of your advisory clients is, get on the phone. Like, don't be afraid to pick up the phone. Don't rely on emails. And, I've had the pleasure of meeting some of your other advisory clients, and all of them say the same thing to me. Like, Pete told me to get on the phone. Pete told me to get on the phone. Pete told me to get on the phone. And you told me the same thing. Look, I don't think anything, I think we've spoken about this previously, but I don't think anything replaces that human interaction, right? You have to have a conversation with someone. Like, there is no avoiding that. You have to understand the customer's problem, and the only way you can truly do that is by having a conversation, whether that's in person or on the phone. Email is just not going to cut it, right? Email is great for a quick, let's set up a Teams meeting, or here's a proposal, but truly understanding the customer, you have to get on the phone. So I think that's what you mean by brute force sales, but there is a power to it. I can't argue with that. And I know that my own win-loss ratio has improved by getting on the phone.
100%. And humans buy from humans.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of just coming from a lunch with an amazing MSP and just sitting down there having a very, very simple burger and a pint of beer. It's amazing how much you can know about them, but also how much they open up about the challenges that they're facing as well. And some of those challenges I could help with. Some of those challenges I could introduce them to somebody else that could help with directly as well. And building those relationships. And we spoke about in the last episode is that your net worth is the value of your network. And don't be afraid to reach out to people and have a conversation, because typically most businesses have an amazing outcome that they can provide. But often they're a little bit shy and almost gun shy about, spruiking and, touting their own trumpet. So, think about who inside of your network that you can have a conversation with. And the conversation is not necessarily about selling something, but back to what we said is understand what the challenge is, and is there an opportunity for you there?
I think the other thing is though, like sometimes I just want to know, like I just want to hear their challenges and like we spoke about this in our intro episode around like we just want people to feel like they're not alone in this scenario because a lot of people don't know how to do this. I think for me, and this is a personal view, sometimes I just want to reach out to people and understand what challenges they're going through and how they solve them. You know, I watched this great TikTok the other day. It was around there was a guy, he wanted to be a millionaire by the time he was 30. He was nearly 29, and he had negative $5,000 in the bank and $30,000 in bills. So he rung the 3 richest people that he knew and got their advice on what to do. And just before his 30th birthday, he had $1 million cash in the bank. So I think that's the type of, I think, power there is as well. It's not always about trying to make a sale. It's actually about trying to, I guess, build your knowledge around things and how to solve problems.
It's that human interaction, but let's face it, that's challenging. Like when you're in the trenches, there's a P1 problem, the phones are ringing with customers that have got challenges, somebody's called in sick. Very hard to be able to then, how do you move the needle forward when fires are going off everywhere inside of the organisation? And I think some of the things to think about is how do you compartmentalise then either your days, so, maybe Monday is Marketing Monday, sales is, Sales Thursday, and maybe you're not able to create that structure, but maybe it's just carving out 1 hour, one time a week just to make 3 phone calls. So, what is it that you're doing that's not hope that the sale's going to come in? What are you doing in order to truly then be able to create opportunity?
Yeah, and push the needle forward.
100%.
Perfect. Thank you, Pete. Thank you for your amazing sales advice. I'm always in awe about how you've got the energy to keep on going and pushing that needle forward. I think episode 3 is done and dusted.
Yeah, look, we'd love to get your feedback. So if you've got particular tips or tricks that have worked for you, pop them in the comments because we can pick those up and cover them in a little bit more detail in further episodes.
Perfect. Thanks for being on the other side of the table, Pete.
Yeah, Kayla, once again, fantastic to be here.